So guys, tell us how the band met.
I was out one day on a nicking spree, hoisting we call it. Yeah.
August 15th, 1997, first time we met.
Yeah, like I say, I was out robbing. And then steal a bunch of the keyboards, and form a new band.
It was the shop I was working in.
When he stood up, wow, what an image. Tall, pretty, blue spiky hair.
No eyeballs.
No eyeballs. I knew that he had to be the front man. I found Russell, our drummer, working in a record shop, Big Rick Black's Record Shack in Soho. Everyone had heard of Russell because he knew everything there was to know about hip-hop. He was the rhythm king. And also he was possessed by the undead, ghostly spirit of his dead friend, Del. So I kidnapped him and took him over to Kong Studios, which was our headquarters.
Yeah, all we needed was a guitarist. Well, we did have one, Paula Crocker.
But she was rubbish.
Moments later, there was a knock on the door, and there was this FedEx crate outside.
Nothing more. No one there. Just a crate.
We opened it up.
And inside was Noodle, our guitarist. We were a band. We changed our name to Gorillaz there and then, and the rest is history. History.
If you've been around the music scene long enough, there's one year that sends a shiver down everyone's spine. 2005. Considered by many to be one of, if not the worst year for music ever. In fact, some people label it as the year that almost killed music. It wasn't just that the music that year was bad, it's that it was all the bad. Some of the worst songs ever made came out this year. Hollaback Girl, My Humps, The Candy Shop, Beverly Hills, Over and Over, Laffy Taffy, and yes, How Could This Happen to Me and Photograph also came out this year. Not to mention the trends of bad music of the early 2000s were in full swing in 2005. Like the over-reliance on bad gangster rap, nu metal, heck even the remnants of Eminem's absolute disaster of an album were still being seen. Now in fairness, not everything that year was an absolute disaster. American Idiot was released that year, and Since You've Been Gone by Kelly Clarkson also came out that year. But as if a law of equivalent exchange, for getting Kelly Clarkson, we also had to get Chris Brown. And to get American Idiot, we also had to get Weezer and Black Eyed Peas' terrible album that year. See what I mean? For every victory that year, we got a crushing defeat. However, there was one saving grace. In the sea of absolutely awful music videos that year, there was one that caught everyone's attention. One that basically forced everyone to look and stare. One that became one of the biggest 100 top songs of that year. It was a song that made us all feel good. Greeting watchers one and all, I'm the Watchful One, and for today's episode of Watchful Watchings, I'm going to take you on a journey to talk about one of my all-time favorite bands, Gorillaz, and how they single-handedly became the greatest virtual band ever created. And this is honestly something I've wanted to do for a while because I love Gorillaz. I've always loved Gorillaz, and I did everything I could to prepare for this. I bought the Gorillaz 2020 Almanac. I got Demon Days on vinyl. I even bought hot sauce and ate everything with it. I'm pretty sure my stomach's destroyed, but I'm okay.
A real appetite.
And I did it all for this band, so let's stop yapping and get to it. And to find out how they became so great, we gotta go all the way back to 1990. Yes, a full 11 years before their first album. And funny enough, the creation of Gorillaz does not actually start with Jamie Hewlett. No, it starts with Damon Albarn and Graham Coxon, who just 2 years prior created the brand new band Blur. And since they just recently got started and started getting big, Graham Coxon actually asked Jamie Hewlett to interview them for Deadline magazine. Why Deadline specifically? Well, because Jamie Hewlett's comic was actually being released for Deadline. It was a little comic you may or may not have heard of known as Tank Girl, which, real quick aside, if you haven't already, give it a read. It's actually a great comic that gave us a really stupid movie with a great casting for Tank Girl herself. In any case, the interview was published in Deadline magazine, and surprisingly, Hewlett actually did not like Albarn at first. He thought Albarn was, and this is a real quote by the way, RC and a wanker.
Well, I think he hated me, and then so in turn I hated him.
I have a feeling this video is going to get very British. It didn't help that Jamie's relationship with Blur was tumultuous at best, as Coxon was actually dating his ex-girlfriend. But despite their differences, Albarn and Hewlett actually shared a flat together. Yeah, I'm not joking. They lived together in Westboro Grove. I would have killed to be a fly on the wall when that conversation happened. You suck. You want to be roommates? Okay. And apparently one day, they just started watching MTV and came up with the idea for Gorillaz. In a 2005 interview with Wired, Hewlett basically said one day they were at home watching MTV with their eyes just kinda glazed. Because if you watch MTV for too long, it's a bit like hell, there's nothing of substance there. So they got the idea for a cartoon band, something that would be a commentary on that. And Albon also added that they grew up on stars from pop idol and celebrity wrestling shows, so it was like a cartoon already.
We're talking like 1999, which might seem like a long time ago. And we were just watching shit and just thought, well, this is really irritating us, and there's so much fake. I mean, this was the time of this was the beginning of the boy band sort of explosion. It just felt so manufactured, and it's like we were like, well, let's make a manufactured band, but make it kind of interesting.
And so they got to work creating a manifesto and thinking of ideas for the animated band, which apparently they have lost since then. Fuck the Da Vinci Code, we need to find the Gorillaz outline. But yeah, they basically spent the good portion of those couple of years just coming up with ideas.
So he's a cartoonist.
Charlie Brown.
I'm a musician. I went away to my studio the next day, just got my keyboards out, made a few tunes. He went to his studio, drew a few pictures. We came back in the evening and realized we had something.
Although as a side note, Damon has gone on record in saying that the first unofficial Gorillaz song was actually Blur's On Your Own, which I actually listened to, and yeah, this has Gorillaz written all over it. But in 1998, they got to work recording their first ever self-titled album, which resulted in the EP of the very first song they ever made, Tomorrow Comes Today. Ah, you were expecting Clint Eastwood, weren't you? We're not quite there yet. And apparently creating Gorillaz was actually quite liberating for Albarn, as he was able to experiment with a lot more different types of music. In an interview with Q Magazine, he was quoted in saying, "One of the reasons I began Gorillaz is that I had a lot of rhythms I never thought I could use with Blur. A lot of that stuff never really seemed to manifest itself in the music we made together as Blur."
For probably a lot of people listening, but I'd been in music for 10 years previously in a band called Blur. So for me, it was such a liberation to just get back to the thing I'd started off when I was a teenager, with just keyboard synthesizers. You know, I spent 10 years being in a rock band.
But it's not like Damon did this all alone. Well, okay, at first he did. But then he got the help of Dan the Automator Nakamura, which, side note, is one of the fucking best producer names I've ever heard. And they knew each other because they collaborated on Dellatron 3030, which was the album of a supergroup of hip-hop artists. And while working on that, Damien also met Del the Funky Homo Sapien and DJ Kid Koala, the latter of which did turntables for a lot of the Gorillaz songs, and the former, well, I think you know who the former is. And if you don't, he's big old ghost guy from Clint Eastwood. And fun fact, he's apparently the cousin of Ice Cube. Yes, that Ice Cube. Pretty small world, isn't it? But Albarn didn't stop there. He was calling all the connections he got. Del the Funky Homo Sapien, DJ Kid Koala, Dan the Automator, Abraham Ferrari from the Buena Vista Social Club, Mia Hartora from Chibumato, Tina Weymouth of Talking Heads. It's actually kind of awesome that Gorillaz always had this supergroup feel to them that actually felt super. But finally, after all the blood, sweat, and tears, on March 26, 2001, the Gorillaz self-titled album, Gorillaz, was released. And it was a massive success. Number 3 on the UK album charts and number 14 in the US 200. Going on to sell over 7 million copies worldwide. And it's honestly not really hard to see why when you look at all the awesome songs that came out of this album. Tomorrow Comes Today, with how almost sombering it feels, yet at the same time still keeping a nice groove to it. 19-2000 just being a freaking party all the way through. Same with Rock the House, with its amazing bombastic drums and amazing vocals by Del the Funky Homo Sapien. They use a goddamn recorder instead of a guitar in this song, and I don't even want to die. And of course, we can't forget Clint Eastwood. It's the song that defines Gorillaz, and for a good reason. Like, people make the joke Gorillaz don't have a genre, and this is the reason why. This song doesn't have a genre. I mean, it's got a rapper, so it's got hip-hop influence, but it's also got rocking bass like a punk song, but it's also got this horror-like synthesizer in the background. It doesn't fit into any genre. But that's kind of why the album works. It's able to be any genre while keeping a through line of having awesome rock music. That's not to say the album doesn't get weird though, like the intro is really fucking bizarre. And there's M1A1, which is a great song and has become a staple of the Gorillaz live performances, and it's a great intro song for one simple reason. It samples the opening score to Day of the Dead. I'm not joking, listen. That's insane, and yet it works. Like, if you were to ask me where do I start with Gorillaz, there's two answers I'm gonna give, and this is one of them. Start with the first album. And I'm honestly so happy that the world loved this album, but that's not to say everything was champagne showers from that point on, as they briefly toured in the US and Europe and apparently Japan. Yeah, they were huge in Japan for some reason. I blame Noodle. In any case, to achieve this, Albert and the rest of the band were obscured in shadows while the visuals were playing on screen. Heck, they would even have the voice cast join them and would play the characters to interact with the audience. And keep in mind, this is before the days of Vocaloids and VTubers, so just imagine how primitive this probably looked. Damien even relented on how difficult it actually was in later interviews.
Well, the first tour we did behind a screen. We did a whole American tour behind a screen. And all you could see were silhouettes occasionally, but it was mostly animation. So we were playing big places. And for someone who just spent the last 10 years out front, being a frontman, it was really weird experience. And I have to say, some nights I wanted to get a knife and just...
And cut it
and stick my head through. But I didn't. I don't know whether I'd want to do that again, but I'm glad I did it. Joe, at the time, I mean, I really tried to keep that anonymity going, but it was really difficult.
But despite that, they kept trucking along and even won awards. Most famously, the 2002 Brit Awards, where they performed for the first time with 3D animation. And for 2002, these look damn impressive. And they honestly should, because it apparently cost £300,000. Heck, there were even talks of making a full-length Gorillaz film, but they kinda just lost interest. Damien once said in an interview, "We lost all interest doing it as soon as we started meeting with studios and talking to these Hollywood executive types. We said, fuck it, we'll sit on the idea until we can do it ourselves, and maybe even raise the money ourselves." In any case, after the major success of 2002 and 2003, he mostly just toured with Blur. But after that was finished, he got right to work making the next studio album. Though he admitted this one was going to be a much darker tone compared to the first album. He's admitted that part of the influence came from a train journey he took with his family through rural China. He admitted it was going to be a concept album. A concept for what? Well, in an interview with MTV.com, he was quoted in saying the whole album kind of tells a story of the night. Staying up during the night, but it's also an allegory. It's what we're living in, basically, the world in a state of night.
That's beautiful, man.
And they went for a completely different approach, as Dan Nakamura wasn't even asked to help produce, and he wasn't busy either. No, for this one, he enlisted the help of Brian Burton, aka Danger Mouse, another great name. Apparently Damien had a lot of trust in him because he was quoted in saying he was one of the best young producers in the world, after hearing his mashup album The Grey. Heck, hearing in interviews, they actually seemed to have a great affinity for each other. Danger Mouse was even quoted in saying, "We never had any arguments. We even have that finish each other's sentences thing happening. There are a lot of the same influences between us, like Eno Marancho and psychedelic punk rock, but he has 10 years on me, so I have some catching up to do. Where he can school me on new wave and punk of the late 70s to early 80s, I can school him on a lot of hip hop. We're very competitive and push each other." Like, honestly, reading and listening to these interviews, it really does seem like they were kindred spirits in a way. And honestly, that's like a golden relationship. I'd kill for something like that in any collaboration. Pushing each other while at the same time having a love for certain things. And just like last time, there was a who's who of collaborators like Ike Turner, Booty Brown, rap legend MF Doom, even, I shit you not, Mr. Dennis Hopper. Dennis Hopper's in a Gorillaz song. That's insane. And then finally, in May 11th, 2005, the result was Demon Days. And believe it or not, it was an even bigger success than the first album, debuting at number friggin' 1 on the UK album charts and number 6 in the US 200. And it's gone 6 times platinum in the UK, double platinum in the United States, and triple platinum in Australia? Really? Okay. But a large part of that was pushed thanks to Feel Good Inc., which I think for a lot of people was the song that got us into Gorillaz in the first place. And rightfully so, because it's the quintessential Gorillaz song in every way possible. Because when you break it down, Feel Good Inc. is not a feel-good song. I mean, the song's literally about drug addiction and dependence. And the lyrics don't even hide it that much either. But I think the reason why no one ever thinks this is a downer song is because it doesn't sound like one. It sounds like a friggin' party, and I think that's why it works so well. Because while the lyrics capture the soul-crushing weight of drug addiction, the music has all the highs of a drug addiction as well. Though the world is falling down around us, drugs can give us a momentary reprieve from all the destruction, making love and turning hand in hand through the fire and the flames. Oh, and De La Soul kills it as a rapper. Like, seriously, look up live performances. Whenever this song comes on, everyone just goes nuts. Even Damien. And it wasn't even the only great song off that album. Kids with Guns probably having one of the best basses ever in music. Like seriously, if it's not number 1, it's top 3 easily. It's such an iconic riff that I'm surprised no one's ever tried to sample it. To El Mañana just being such a sombering and sad song. Like seriously, I cried the first time I heard it. To Dirty Harry also being an awesome party song with a killer synthesizer, and then Booty Brown coming in with an insane rap verse. Meanwhile, all these songs still having much darker meanings to them. Like El Mañana about loss, Kids with Guns about the children of the future being forced into war, and Dirty Harry about PTSD. Like, you can absolutely tell when you break this album down, it was made in a post 9/11 world, but it never lost sight of what made Gorillaz great: amazing kick-ass party music. Honestly, the only song I can think of that doesn't have any darker meaning is Dare, and that's only because I'm certain it's supposed to be a sex jam. Masturbation at the very least. But it still had its funny, goofy moments like fire coming out of a monkey's head. And it ends beautifully with the 1-2 punch of Don't Get Lost in Heaven and Demon Days. A beautiful, soulful send-off to what is a beautiful, soulful album. It's still considered by many to be the best album, and rightfully so, and is easily in my top 5 best albums ever. And what's crazy is the album was almost completely propelled thanks to Feel Good Inc. because they didn't even tour. No, instead they just booked a 5-day residency at the Manchester Opera House to perform Demon Days live. And I think you could tell Damien wanted to be a little more in the spotlight because you can actually see the performers this time, even if they are just silhouettes. They even recorded a live showing of this called Demon Days Live. If you haven't seen it yet, look it up, it's a lot of fun. Especially when they get to Dare, which, fun fact, the guy performing that song was completely shit-faced when he performed. And the only other time they performed was at the Apollo Theater almost a year later. But the award shows definitely took interest as they performed at the MTV European Music Awards and the Grammys. And this time, thanks to Moosian eyeliner technology, they were able to perform live on stage. But it wasn't all great, as album was actually disappointed with the execution, citing the low volume that was required to not disturb the technology. And yeah, you can kind of see it because look at how stiff they look in this.
Been working with holograms. I mean,
I'm
trying
jealous.
to get
I want to do that
holograms
for
to
this
work.
show.
But I mean, when we opened the Grammys, when was it? 2005.
With Madonna.
Yeah, but that was tough because you were on stage. But the technology then was actually a Victorian technology. It was proper smoke and mirrors. There was nothing really technical about it at all. I mean, on television it looked incredible. But we opened the Grammys. This was my big moment. I was there. I was obscured by Bono's Stetson hat, which was slightly annoying. But, I got over that, and they started. And it was so quiet because it's got this piece of like film that you have to pull over the stage, and so any bass frequencies would just mess up the illusion completely. So we start this thing, and no one really thinks even that the Grammys have started because it's so quiet. So everyone's still in,
Walking
checking
around,
themselves
talking,
and doing all that bullshit. On television, it looked great, but this was my moment. I was, and people just talking around me, didn't even notice what was going on. And then, so Madonna walks from being a hologram onto the other side of the stage where she's doing her thing, and the volume just goes up by 100 times. And suddenly everyone's like paying attention, so I felt a little bit kind of cheated.
Let's be honest.
But on the bright side, Feel Good Inc. won Best Pop Collaboration and was even nominated for Record of the Year. Heck, Albarn and Hewlett even explored the idea of a full live holographic tour. Unfortunately, they slowly realized not only was the technology impractical to do that, but it was also going to be insanely expensive. And after that, the only last bit of merchandise related to it was Rise of the Ogre, which was an autobiographical book. But it wasn't Hewlett and Damien, no. It was the actual band members from the fictional band. And that was another thing I absolutely loved. Even though Damien and Hewlett were the main creators, they still had massive lore and voices for all the fictional band members. Like literally every album that's ever been released has its own lore and own story. In fact, allow me to regale you with the story of how the Gorillaz were actually founded. You see, it all started back when Murdock was riding a stolen car around and accidentally smashed the car into a record store. And that's where he met 2D. Right before the car promptly smacked 2D right in the eye, causing blood to fill the eye to the point where it looks like he has a complete blank eye socket. And of course, Murdock got punished for it, and his punishment was to be 2D's keeper. Yeah, because 2D was a vegetable and couldn't do anything for himself.
I don't know what I did wrong.
And so while driving again, 2D managed to go out of the car and slam his head on the pavement, causing his other eye to fill up with blood, but he regained consciousness. And Murdock, seeing this tall, lanky, blue-haired man with no eyes at all, immediately said, "This guy's a frontman." And so after securing some instruments, he also hooked up with Russell from the Bronx, who was apparently in a terrible accident where several ghosts were trapped inside of him, one of which was Del the Funky Homo Sapien. But now that they had Russell, they had a drummer, and they had a bassist, and Tootie was the vocalist. They just needed a guitar. Well, to be specific, they had a guitarist, Tootie's girlfriend, but Murdock ended up sleeping with her and then kicked her out of the band, claiming she was... oh, how does he put it?
Have one. Paula Cracker.
But she was rubbish.
Yeah, that. But one day, while at Kong's studio, they got a package in the mail, and inside the package was Noodle. They were finally a band. And yes, that's the actual origin of the Gorillaz. That's just a taste of the crazy lore that the Gorillaz have. And I think that's why people consider them the quintessential virtual band, because they acted like a real band. They had struggles, they had lore. MTV would show shorts of them just hanging out and having fun. They even got on mother-loving MTV Cribs.
Hi, I'm Murdock Nichols from Gorillaz. Welcome to my crib.
This is real, people. I will leave it in the description. And I love that despite being completely animated and virtual, they're given all the love and respect of a real band.
Yeah, who can blame him? Huh? Murdock is a knob. I'll get him.
But at the same time, they were never like a traditional band. As cliche as it is to say, the beauty was in their imperfection. Jamie Hewlett's art style, while beautiful, was always very grungy and punk, which meant it was perfect for music videos, but also meant the characters were always going to look very grungy. And that really does show. Murdock was a zombie, Tootie was a big lanky guy with no eyes, and Russell was literally too big to fit in his drum set. Honestly, the only one you could argue that's always had a great design was Noodle. So he went from cute to cuter to absolutely cute to damn hot.
Oh, yeah.
I got off track. I realized that. But yeah, they were just treated like normal people, so much so that they actually did age in universe. Not even joking, Murdock and 2D are in their 40s and 50s now. And I honestly could, and I do mean I could, go on and on for days about the lore of the Gorillaz. But there's plenty of videos about that, and I want to cover more the music and the behind the scenes stuff. So if you want a more in-depth dive on the lore, go check out Foundflix's video on the subject, or even Hoodie Hoodlum's Revenge. I'll leave a link to Hoodie Hoodlum's channel and the Foundflix video in the description. But let's get back to the story of the Gorillaz themselves, because after the success of Demon Days, Jamie and Damien actually worked together on an opera called Monkey Journey to the West. Yes, that Journey to the West. Yes, it was a full-blown opera about Journey to the West, I'm not joking. But after they finished that, they worked on the next big Gorilla project, which was simply entitled Carousel. It was described as being about the mystical aspects of Britain. Hewlett described it in an interview as being even bigger and more difficult than Monkey, like a film but with not one narrative story, many stories told through a bigger story set to music, done in live action, animation, and several different styles. So from what I'm hearing, it sounds like a musical version of an anthology film. That actually sounds kind of awesome. And apparently Damien wrote 70 songs for it. But as you can expect, this kind of thing was way too ambitious for what they were doing. So they dropped the carousel concept, and basically the work evolved into their third album, Plastic Beach, which, as you can expect from the name, drew from heavy environmentalist themes. Damien said in an interview that it was heavily inspired by a secret floating island in the South Pacific, made of debris and washed up remnants, inspired by all the plastic Damien found on a nearby beach near his hometown of Devon, as well as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is apparently a circulation of water flow that sends garbage all around the Pacific. That actually sounds terrifying, I'm not gonna lie. However, unlike the last two albums, Damien chose to go solo with producing this one, and in 2008 to 2009, recording started, which was only briefly stopped so that Damien could rejoin Blur for a reunion tour. It's funny, he honestly spends so much time on Gorillaz, I forget he's the lead singer of Blur. And I think Damien went a little crazy with the collaborators because this was the largest collaborative effort for any album so far. Mos Def, Bobby Womack, Paul Simon, even the Lebanese National Symphony Orchestra, and goddamn Snoop Doggy Dogg were on this. But finally, after all the craziness, on March 3rd, 2010, Plastic Beach was released. And while it very obviously didn't do as well as Demon Days, it still premiered at number 2 on UK and US charts. I partially blame that on the fact that their lead single was Stylo. Now don't misunderstand me, Stylo is a great fucking song. but it kind of put in the forefront all the major changes that were going to come for this album. For one thing, it was a very plastic album. Yeah, I know, what an apt description considering the title, but it's true. Whereas the last two albums were very alt-rock inspired, this was 100% electropop. Like, the only song that even comes close to the bombastic feel of the first two albums is Superfast Jellyfish, and that's mostly because De La Soul came back for that song, which honestly, great choice that they collaborate with those guys a lot, because they always make it such a party whenever they're on an album. But other than that, Plastic Beach was a much more laid-back album compared to the other two. Even when things did get heavy like in Stylo and Rhinestone Eyes, it still felt very laid back. But don't think any of that is disrespect towards the album, because honestly, I love that. By going for a much more plastic electropop album, they were able to create something very beautiful, honestly. Like, honestly, I love Gorillaz and I love Demon Days. Plastic Beach is pretty high up there, and it's honestly a competitor for my favorites. And that's mostly because while Demon Days had Feel Good Inc., which was a very strong single, the singles off Plastic Beach were honestly so damn good. And then when you get to the album proper, the main album songs are also great. But if you want a perfect representation of how great the album is, the second single they released perfectly sums it up. Because after Stylo, their follow-up single was On Melancholy Hill. It is in my top 5 favorite songs of all time. It is honestly and earnestly one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard. And it's a song that's only ever gotten better the older I get. The feeling of absolute melancholy isolation is honestly one I think a lot of people relate to, myself included. Relating to isolation while at the same time hoping and wishing that the people you love are up there with you. But even though I say hoping and wishing, you know they're there with you. You know you're all on the hill together. And you wonder if everyone else knows about this place, this hill with a plastic tree, and the world doesn't seem so melancholy when you're close to the person you love. And like I said, it's honestly a message that's only ever resonated more and more the older I get. And the more friends I make, the further I get in life, and the further I get with the love of my life, the more it resonates. Like seriously, if you take nothing else away from my video, listen to this song. You won't regret it. And it's pretty fitting that one of my favorite songs comes from one of my favorite albums. And they sure as hell wanted to make sure people knew this album because they went on a tour called Escape to the Plastic Beach. It was their first ever worldwide tour. Don't get your hopes up though, because it was just basically the actual band live on stage. The virtual band was only there with visuals from the music videos and nothing else. I know, pretty disappointing, but at least the album made up for it. Plus on the bright side, they all wore naval attire. That's honestly pretty cute. Heck, they even performed at Coachella where, I kid you not, Snoop Dogg performs Clint Eastwood. Although on a side note, where the fuck is Del whenever they're doing these? Like seriously, he's never on these. But then again, he got his paycheck. I kid you not, the royalties he got from Clint Eastwood paid off his first house.
I didn't even know about it. I told you how I feel like people coming up to me like, you don't know about your hit song? It's on the radio all the time. This fool don't even know it's, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not even paying attention to it, really. I mean, it's cool. It paid for my house that I live in, you know what I'm saying? So it's cool, you know what I'm saying?
However, there is one interesting thing that happened while they were going through the North American leg of the tour. You see, Damien didn't stop making music. He recorded music entirely on his iPad during this leg of the tour. And these recordings later in 2010 became the album The Fall, which Damien, apparently knowing exactly what he did, released it digitally on Christmas Day. I mean, yeah, you could say The Fall was basically a B-sides, but it's one of the most interesting B-sides I've ever seen. Because the whole album, and this was confirmed by Damien by the way, is basically a whole diary of the American leg of the tour. They were presented exactly as they were on the day it was written and recorded with no additional overdubs. Or production for that matter. In an interview with The Guardian, Damien said, "I literally made it up on the road. I didn't write it before, I didn't prepare it, I just did it the day by day as a kind of diary of my experience in America. If I left it until the new year to release, then the cynics out there would say, oh well, it's been tampered with. But if I put it out now, they'd know that I haven't done anything because I've been on the tour ever since." And this is honestly why I respect Damien so much, because holy shit, that has to take so much commitment. Because I don't think we often realize all the work that goes into promoting an album. Because between promoting the album, doing interviews, going on tour, going to big concerts, big festivals, going to any award shows if that's possible, going to talk shows, and on top of all that, trying to find time for your own personal life, during all that, for Damien to somehow find time to release an entire album is nuts. Yes, it's basically a B-sides, but it's a B-sides that's basically a diary of an American tour. An American part of an already world tour, all recorded on an iPad. I am mad that I lack that amount of commitment and talent. And each song is about a different city that he was in, though I don't know why Pioneer of Arizona is about Montreal, but Revolving Doors is about Boston, The The Joplin Spider is about Joplin. The Parish of Space Dust is about Houston. And there's 2 songs about Chicago, Chi-Town and Little Plastic Bags. Which, side note, Chi-Town is another one that's very personal to me, because I actually had the honor of seeing the Gorillaz live when they toured in Chicago. And well, I'll let Damien say everything he needs to say about Chi-Town.
When we played here in 2010, I was just making like little tunes in the hotels, and I made 2 tunes here. I was very inspired by many things about this city. We've never played this song before, and we'll never play it again, so this is just a one for you. It's called Chi-Town.
And yes, this was the actual concert I attended. That's not me recording it, by the way, but I am there. So yeah, if you want an interesting diary of different songs of America while going on a tour, check it out. However, shortly after the tour, they actually released a single. In February 2012, they released Do Ya Thing, and for something that isn't connected to an album of any kind, it's probably one of the best singles ever. No joke, it was just meant to be a promotion for Converse shoes. It even featured one of my favorite albums, Andre 3000, and even had James Murphy of LCD Sound System. But a bit of advice, only watch the original 4.5-minute version. There's a 13-minute version of this, and oh my god, it goes on forever. That being said though, the music video is pretty damn cool. It's the band members in 3D, and they actually mocapped this. They had someone do all the motion in a green screen suit while they added on the 3D models. And holy crap, are these detailed models. Maybe a little too detailed. But yeah, things were going very well. Plastic Beach was doing very well, and their new single was doing very well. But unfortunately, this is where things get a little sad. Because rather unfortunately, Damien and Jamie had a falling out. Basically, from what we do know, it was apparent that Jamie felt like he was being less and less important in the band. He would see all these amazing people like Half the Clash, Bobby Womack, Mos Def, De La Soul, Hypnotic Brass Ensemble, and Bassie, and everyone else. It was the greatest band ever, but meanwhile, the screens that projected his animations and his creations were getting smaller and smaller. Or at least that's how he felt anyway. And meanwhile, Damien felt like the music and the videos weren't really matching together. And that's about all we got out of interviews. So basically, it sounds like they were just basically having a disagreement. Jamie wanted the band to take center focus, and Damien wanted the music to take center focus. And honestly, just sharing my humble opinion, they both have a good point. I know for a lot of people, it was the fact that it was a virtual and animated band and that they all had their own personality why we fell in love. I mean, Feel Good Eating is a great song, but I don't think any of us would have been drawn in without the video. Gorillaz would not be what they are without the other, and Plastic Beach really was a symbol that it was leaning more towards just a regular ass band. Thankfully, Damien was more optimistic later in April, as he said that they would eventually come together again. They just needed time apart. Which, you know what, considering how tumultuous things were for them, that's fair. So they just both went off to do their own thing, a-dang. Damien released a solo album called Everyday Robots and toured with Blur. Meanwhile, Jamie held an art exhibition. He was also trying to create a film project, but it never really went anywhere. However, while Damien was promoting Everyday Robots on his tour, he expressed interest in having another stab at Gorillaz. He was even writing songs on the road while he was touring. And then one day while he was speaking about their well-publicized falling out, he basically said that their relationship was helped in the long run because of it. Personally, I like to think that when they saw each other's sides, they mulled it over and realized that they were both important. So I kid you not, they apparently got a drink together, and it was a, do you want to do a Gorillaz album? Do you? Yeah, sure, let's do it. And then they probably got shit-faced off British Lager, true story. So then while Damien was touring with Blur, Jamie apparently had to relearn how to draw the characters again. I find that fact pretty hilarious. But finally, in late 2015, after the touring was done, they got back into the studio. But this time, it seemed like things were going to be a little different for this album. For starters, they brought on another co-producer, this time Anthony Khan, aka The Twilight Tone, a renowned hip-hop house producer. But they also brought on Remy Kabaka Jr., who had apparently been with the band since 2000. Who was he since 2000?
Oh yeah, I got a real appetite.
That's right, he was the voice of Russell this entire time. Talk about a promotion, you started voicing one of the characters and now you make music for the characters. But if the people they were bringing on wasn't enough of an indicator that this was going to be a very different album, Damien Albarn and Anthony Khan apparently envisioned Humans as, and I quote, a soundtrack for the party at the end of the world.
Kind of came from this dark fantasy of, which I suppose came into my head beginning of last year, which was like, just imagine the weirdest, unpredictable thing happening that changes everything about the world. How will you feel on that night? How will you kind of go out? Will you go and get drunk? Will you just stay at home? Will you just watch TV? Will you talk to people? And, you know.
And just to give you an indicator of how dated this album truly was, it was specifically imagining a future where Trump won the election.
And I suppose we were imagining the idea of Donald Trump. You know, it's not about Donald Trump.
No.
At all.
Because you started way before.
But it was imagining that happening in a way. That was our dark fantasy, and unfortunately it became reality, you know?
There is not enough computers in the world to run enough roadblocks in the world for the amount of oofs that creates.
You heard it here first, hot take. It is the Gorillaz' fault that Donald Trump is president. It's all a part of the marketing campaign. I mean, watch out.
And I'm honestly still surprised people don't know that this is an anti-Trump album. Like, people, the first single was Hallelujah Money. How is this not obvious? But while we're on the subject of that, I'm just gonna say this. Wow, was this a weird single to promote the album. Now don't get me wrong, Hallelujah Money is a very harrowing song. The vocals are powerful like a preacher, and it sounds angelic while at the same time foreboding. And even though Damien doesn't sing much on the album, the little singing he does do is so melancholy. But I mean, the thing with the Gorillaz is that the lead single's always been a bit of a party. I mean, yes, Stylo was a bit dark, but it still had that Gorillaz feel. But Hallelujah Money? Well, let's just play all the lead singles side by side and you tell me if it sticks out.
I ain't happy, I'm feeling glad I got sunshine in a bag, I'm useless.
Oh, trust me, hallelujah.
Hallelujah, mother.
Like, it sticks out worse than a sore thumb, doesn't it? And it was honestly a hard indicator that this was, in fact, gonna be a big departure for Gorillaz. But that was their choice because they wanted an album that had urgency, pain, and joy, and one that showed the struggle and urgency of African American music. This album was going to be hugely influenced by African American music, particularly house and hip-hop. And that became even more apparent when we saw all the different guest stars. Popcorn, Vince Staples, Drum, Jenny Beth, Peef Everett, Danny Brown, Grace Jones, Mavis Staples, even Pusha T. The other three albums had a nice balance of different sounds and different music, where they could have a rap verse on but still have their own distinguished sound and style. Demon Days could have a rapper on while still being alt rock. The original Gorillaz could have a rapper on but still be very punk rock. But this? It was very obvious the sound they were going for: hip-hop, house, and techno. And considering the world that this was being released in, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing either. And I joked about the Trump thing, but considering Trump actually won, I guess they figured it was the perfect time to release the album. Which, no joke, they did release Hallelujah Money on the day of Trump's inauguration. It was just meant to be what will be sung at his inauguration as kind of a joke, and then it actually happened. Again, we need to invent an oof step canon just to contain all that. But finally, after that little debacle, on April 28th, 2017, the band's first studio album in 7 years was finally released. And it was actually a pretty modest success, premiering at number 2 on the UK and US charts. It was also generally well received overall. However, one complaint, myself included, that a lot of people had with this album was a severe lack of a certain presence. Can you guess what that presence was? I'll give you a hint, it's in the band name. Yeah, the Gorillaz felt like a nothing on their own album. I wish I was joking, but Damien, 2D, whoever the hell you want to consider for it, they were a non-presence on this entire album. Just look at the lead singles, Saturn Bars and Hallelujah Money, they were barely on them. And I know that sounds like such a nitpick, but come on, it's the Gorillaz. We want to see the Gorillaz. And again, don't get me wrong, it's not like the album was a complete failure, it had great songs on it. Saturn Bars is an unbelievably awesome trip.
that Irish one, the Saturn Box.
We call
Tell them about
it's
that.
our nickname is we call it the Irish one because he goes, "Oh my life."
Shut up, 2D.
What?
Listen.
Strobe Light is just a fun little house party jam, although admittedly it is much better live. Busted in Blue is just a soulfully powerful song, and Andromeda, oh my god, Andromeda. Like, holy crap, Andromeda is probably up there with some of my favorite songs out there, and it's barely about anything. Not to mention it probably has my favorite album closer out of all of them, We Got the Power. And don't get me wrong, it's a good song, but it's even better in the album's context, if I'm being totally honest. Because after a whole album of being a party about the end of the world, it ends on a hopeful message that we got the power to change the world. A message I really wish people would fucking follow. But whatever. Besides, none of that mattered. What was important was that even though things were a little different, the Gorillaz were back and making music. And I do mean they were back making music because literally a year later, we got another album. And just like The Fall, this one was recorded while Damien was still on tour. But unlike The Fall, it was given a much more polished feel. He wanted it to still have the spontaneity of The Fall while at the same time feeling more complete. Damien's even said that he likes recording and performing songs at the same time. And he was true to his word because he performed the song live on September 30th, 2017. Those lucky bastards got a taste with Idaho of what the next album was gonna hold. So in February 2018, he got to work on the next album, and he had another producer help. This time James Ford, a producer who already did work for the Arctic Monkeys and Florence and the Machine. And considering the Arctic Monkeys already had a Gorillaz-like sound, James Ford was a perfect choice honestly. And 4 months later, on June 29th, the Now Now was released. Their 6th studio album. And being totally honest, the Now Now was the perfect follow-up for Humans. Whereas Humans did have some nice, joyful, upbeat party jams, it was also very dour overall. Whereas the Now Now, while having some minor dour moments here and there, was much more upbeat and happy. It was the album we needed to remind us that the Gorillaz could still be awesome. And that was apparent with the very first single off that album, Humility, which was just a fucking awesome summer jam if I'm being totally honest. Like seriously, this had all the makings of a summer jam and I'm glad they released it around the summertime. It's appropriate that 2D is skating in the video because it's totally the song I would play if I skated. And can I also just say holy crap has the animation gotten so good. Like seriously, this is nuts at the animation on this part. It's so good. Now Humans also had some fun stuff, don't get me wrong, but it's so colorful here compared to Humans. And also no more of that weird, uncanny 3D shit they were doing in Humans. Like seriously, what the fuck was with that anyway?
Tourette's when he does his interviews.
I can understand that. I get similar when I'm asking questions, which is why I've got them in front of me here.
Only show me those 3D models if it's stupid crazy dancing 2D. At least that was entertaining. Oh, and also another fun fact about the Now Now. There were only 2 songs that had featured artists this time, which was pretty different considering they always collaborated with a ton of people, but they really didn't have a lot of time to make it. Plus, I think after the massive amount of collaborators on the last album, they wanted to keep things simple. And it worked as this was their 6th album to break the top 5, and it was their 5th in the United States. But as far as the storyline of the fictional band, things got a little crazy during this album. Because apparently Murdock was arrested and sent to prison, and so Noodle got someone to help them beat a bassist. And I kid you not, it's Ace from the Powerpuff Girls. And no, I don't mean as someone that looks like Ace. No, it's literally Ace. It's Ace, the character. Apparently Damien and Jamie were actually very good friends with the creator and loved the Powerpuff Girls. And so I guess one day they asked Craig McCracken if they could use Ace for the album, and he said sure. Although we should have seen this coming considering the Gorillaz exist in the Powerpuff Girls universe. You think I'm joking, but I'm not. Take a look. See, the Gorillaz toured in Townsville. They're in the same universe. The Gorillaz multiverse is insane. But that wasn't the end of it, as there was also a very big promotion known as Free Murdock, where basically it was up to the fans to help Murdock get out of prison. It was up to them if they wanted Murdock back. Basically all they had to do was tweet about stuff and enter in votes, and basically if there was enough votes, he would get the chance to fight the big guy in prison. And if he beat him, he could win the respect of the prisoners and orchestrate an escape. And it worked, as Murdock got his freedom and went back to the Gorillaz. But before we cover that, there's one nice little tidbit I want to point out that kind of warmed my heart a little bit. So remember when I mentioned Kabaka Jr., who basically became a producer from Humans onward? Well, in the Gorillaz documentary Reject False Icons, he's actually credited as a member of Gorillaz. And that just warms my heart. The guy who played Russell from the very beginning and became the producer is now a member. That honestly just warmed my heart to hear that fact. And with that, the Gorillaz were finally back on top and ready to make music. And thankfully we didn't have to wait 7 years this time, because in January 2020, they started a brand new project, Song Machine, where basically Jamie Hewlett and David Albarn basically said that they don't need to start making albums anymore. They can release episodes and seasons of songs and then release the album. So yes, they basically treated the songs they were releasing as episodes of a TV show, where they would release the songs monthly.
How long did this take to get together? Well, it started off like last October. We've just want to make music when I feel like it, as opposed to sort of dedicating 2 or 3 months to making a record.
And despite the very real global pandemic that was going on, they didn't slow down for even a second, as they released their very first single, Momentary Bliss. And can I just say, holy crap, what a good first impression. Momentary Bliss is still my favorite from the first season of Song Machine. It was the song that made me say Gorillaz were back. I mean, yeah, they were back obviously, but I mean they were back to true form. They were back and better than ever. They found the perfect balance with their guest stars and the Gorillaz themselves. They were back to their punk rock roots. It really, honestly, and earnestly sounded like they were back on track to being the Gorillaz we all knew and loved. And thankfully, it was not a fluke, because the very next month they released Désolé, a very nice, very calming song with some awesome, I want to say almost Spanish-style strings. And the featured singer Fatoumata Diawara just singing her soul out. And at the same time, it still sounded a little somber, but the Gorillaz were always in the forefront, and I mean both Damien and the characters. Because even though there wasn't an overarching story to Song Machine, it still felt like the characters were the characters and they were a priority just as much as the music. It felt like Damien and Jamie finally felt a perfect mix for the two of them. And if you haven't guessed it by this point, I'm just going to be going through all the singles because I can talk about all of these because I love them so much. But anyway, the next episode was Aries, released in April. Look at that, Aries for April, how appropriate. A song that featured Peter Hook of Joy Division and Georgia. But what's interesting is that Aries didn't sound like any other Gorillaz song, which I know it probably shouldn't, everything should be original, but at the same time what I mean is that it didn't have a sound like any other album. And actually to me, that's kind of what I love about Song Machine. It almost feels like a best of album without it actually being a best of album. It had all the best sounds of the previous albums while still having their own sound. It felt like a best of in the sense that every single single for this felt like a song that was on another album that could be one of their chart toppers. But while some of them shared unique sounds to other albums, others didn't sound like anything they'd done before in the best way possible. And they were just on a roll with animated music video after animated music video. The only one that didn't get a music video was How Far, and that's because it was a tribute to Tony Allen, who tragically died. But honestly, even that was an amazing song. They were all amazing songs. Friday the 13th, Pac-Man was great. Strange Times, oh my god, Strange Times. Strange Times had a very horror-style sound that could fit in a horror movie, kind of harkening to their horror sounds like sampling Day of the Dead. And Pac-Man is pretty much the first time they've used chiptunes. I kid you not, they used a synthesizer that sounded very much like chiptunes from an old Pac-Man game. I would have never expected Gorillaz would be able to pull off chiptunes, but holy crap did they pull it off. And it was apparently released for the 40th anniversary of Pac-Man, which, interesting. Then again, it sounds like it could be in Pac-Man, so I'm not complaining. But none of them compared to the Pink Phantom, which featured Sir Elton John. Which, I'm just gonna say this, how the hell did this take nearly 20 years to finally do? I mean seriously, Elton John and Gorillaz together, that's like a match made in heaven. How the hell did it take this long? But that's a pretty stupid complaint considering it's probably one of the best songs. Like, Elton John singing adds so much to it. He is honest to god in top form and I love it. But out of all the songs they released, the one I probably listen to the most out of all of them is The Valley of the Pagans. It's got Beck and it's nonsensical like a Beck song, you can't beat it.
Oh my god, you're back!
I know the lyrics probably do have a meaning, but I'm gonna pretend like they don't. And that's just because the song is so awesome, it doesn't need to have a meaning. Honestly, it reminds me a lot of 19-2000, and I love that. Because if you remind me of one of my favorite Gorillaz songs of all time, you're doing something good. But it still adds its own flair and it's not a copy, especially with Beck joining in. Although this song did cause a bit of controversy as it was apparently entirely filmed in GTA 5, but then it was mysteriously privatized for some reason. Now, nobody knows for sure, but people are speculating that Rockstar had something to do with this, and that honestly would not surprise me if that was the case because, well, it's Rockstar. But again, it's speculation. But they finally released a proper video for it, and honestly, I like it a lot more. It calls back to 19-2000 a lot more, and it also has holographic Beck. I mean, that's just cool. And then they finally released their very last song off there, The Last Chord, in December. And what a song to end on. It's easily the most somber song on the whole album. And what makes it even worse is they destroyed Plastic Beach! they destroy Plastic Beach in the video. As a fan of that album, that was honestly soul crushing to see it get destroyed. But maybe it's symbolic. Maybe they're saying that they've moved past Plastic Beach, and that the characters have too much trauma for them to want to remember it. But I can honestly forgive them considering we got one hell of an interesting project. And with that, Song Machine comes to an end, and the history of the Gorillaz is over. And so with all that all the way, with a tumultuous, interesting history with one of the most interesting animated bands ever, what does the future hold for the Gorillaz? Well, for one thing, Damien Albarn has said on multiple occasions that he has a ton of songs planned for Gorillaz. So we can expect him and Jamie to create music far into the future and not stop anytime soon. Heck, Damien and Jamie are even in talks with going to Netflix for an animated Gorillaz TV show. And they said it may or may not tie into a future season of Song Machine. That's honestly just nuts, and to me, it amazes me that the Gorillaz continue to break boundaries. From being the biggest and best animated band in the world, to being a progenitor to holographic technology, to creating giant orchestras, to Song Machine, to the entirety of the Now Now and Humans, and especially those first three. The Gorillaz have honestly left a legacy unlike any other band I've ever seen before. Heck, for Humans, they went above and beyond and made a 360 VR music video for Saturn Bars. And to me, that's everything I love about Gorillaz. Not just that they're an animated band, not just that they push the boundaries of what animated bands can do, but they make damn good music and never lose sight of the music or the characters for that matter. That's why from the first time I ever heard their music up until now, I've always been a fan. So Damien, Jamie, and everyone else who helps make this a possibility, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for 20 years of Gorillaz, and here's to 20 more.
I just took a line, but I wasn't with you. There was more of it there when I got back home. But you left me, you don't know my soul. You're a whole girl. Lost together. Yeah, you're a whole girl. I got lost on the game. From the over the edge. You make a big mistake. You make a big mistake.
It's me.